Good afternoon everyone and welcome to the stream. I'm Robert from El Magnifico Games and today we're going to continue with our usual Wednesday poetry, prose and riddles. So last week we finished on Crossing the Bar by Lord Tennyson. Alfred Lord Tennyson was this gentleman here. He was a poet laureate during much of Queen Victoria's reign. He wrote Charge of the Light Brigade among many other famous poems. So that's who we're talking about. So I will begin the stream with the usual rereading of the last poem we looked at last week, which is Crossing the Bar, and then we'll move on to new ones once we haven't encountered before in these streams. So, Crossing the Bar. Sunset and evening star, and one clear call for me, and may there be no moaning of the bar when I put out to sea. But such a tide as moving seems asleep, too full for sound and foam, when that which drew from out the boundless deep turns again home. Twilight and evening bell, and after that the dark. And may there be no sadness of farewell when I embark. For though from out our bourne of time and place the flood may bear me far, I hope to see my pilots face to face when I have crossed the bar. So that was Crossing the Bar. So it seems we move on to a new poet this time. Edmund Waller. Ooh, this is early. This is... I think he was born contemporaneously with Shakespeare, although presumably he would have been writing just afterwards. So this is someone that saw the English Civil War then. I don't know whether he served, but he was alive at that time. Edmund Waller was an English poet and politician who was Member of Parliament for various constituencies between 1624 and 1687. 1624? When he was born in 1606. So he was a Member of Parliament from 18, it would seem. Or around then. And one of the longest serving members of the English House of Commons. Son of a wealthy lawyer with extensive estates in Buckinghamshire, Waller first entered Parliament in 1624, although he played little part in the political struggles of the period prior to the First English Civil War in 1642. Unlike his relatives William and Hardress Waller, he was royalist in sympathy and was accused in 1643 of organising a plot to seize London for Charles I. He allegedly escaped the death penalty by paying a large bribe, while several conspirators were executed, including his brother-in-law Nathaniel Tomkins. Goodness. After his sentence was commuted to banishment, he lived in comfortable exile in France and Switzerland until allowed home in 1651 by Oliver Cromwell, a distant relative. He returned to Parliament after the restoration in 1660 of Charles II. Known as a fine and amusing orator, he held a number of minor offices. He largely retired from active politics after the death of his second wife in 1677 and died of edema in October 1687. What do I mean by died of edema? Also known as dropsy. It's the build-up of fluid in the body's tissues. I'm familiar with that form of edema, but I wasn't aware it could kill you. Most commonly, the legs or arms are affected. Symptoms may include skin which feels tight, the area may feel heavy, and so on. Huh. I didn't realise that could kill you. But still. Best remembered now for his poem Song, Go Lively Rose. Waller's earliest writing dates to the 1630s, commemorating events that occurred in the 1620s, including a piece on Charles's escape from a shipwreck at Santander in 1625. Written in heroic couplets, it is one of the first examples of a form used by English poets for some 2 centuries. His verse was admired by John Dryden, among others, while he was a close friend of Thomas Hobbes and John Evelyn. Interesting. Dryden in particular is a very significant and notable English poet. When he died, Waller was considered a major English poet, but his reputation declined over the next century, one view seeing him as a fair-weather royalist, an expedient republican, and a mercenary bridegroom. By mercenary bridegroom, I assume they mean that he married for wealth, so that suggests that at least one of his wives must have belonged to a family that was either rich or possibly having a great deal of status and influence. He is now regarded as a minor author whose primary significance was to develop a form adapted and improved by later poets like Alexander Pope. Interesting. Yeah, I thought so. Heroic couplets consist of a rhyming pair of lines in iambic pentameter, but that wasn't of his invention. Yeah, pioneered by Chaucer much earlier. I mean, Chaucer was still writing in what would now be called Middle English, wasn't he? Perhaps he was just barely past that. Yeah, Chaucer was writing in the 1300s. So yeah, that would have been Middle English, I'm pretty certain. Yep. So I wonder what form they're referring to Edmund Waller as having created and later being adapted and improved by later poets. Oh, it does say develop, not create. Anyway, is it worth going through the page? Probably not. In this case, I think we got a good sense of who he was just from the brief description at the top. If anything feels lacking while we're going through his poetry, then of course we can go back and have a closer look. So the first poem is On a Girdle. I'd probably better double check. What's a girdle then? Is that the type of belt? A belt or sash at the waist, often used to support stockings or hosiery. Yes, that's what I was thinking for the girdle. Anything which girds or encircles a garment used to hold the abdomen, hips, buttocks or thighs, etc. So, on a girdle. That which a slender waist can find shall now my joyful temples bind. No monarch but would give his crown, his arms might do what this has done. It was my heaven's extremest sphere, the pale which held that lovely dear. My joy, my grief, my hope, my love, did all within the circle move. All within this circle move. A narrow compass, and yet there dwell all that's good and all that's fair. Give me but what this ribbon bound, take all the rest the sun goes round. Interesting. If I'm following it correctly, then it's certainly a little lewder than later poetry was supposed to be. Perhaps that's why he fell out of favour during Georgian times. Because I believe what's the word? What's the word? I can't think of the proper word right now, unfortunately, but the degree to which people were expected to say and write things that were entirely clean, that all started around Georgian times and then was brought to a height during Victorian times. Oh, what is the proper word for that? I can't think of it right now. Anyway. Where were we? Roughly speaking, there's pairs of lines which rhyme, but crown and done, I should say, aren't full rhymes, nor are love and move. love and mover, of course, I rhymes. Otherwise it's rhyming. I wonder if that's a shift in the language, or the pronunciation, or if that is... Or if it was intended to not rhyme properly. I particularly find the crown and done one quite jarring, because it ends a stanza. But I don't know, it seems odd to think they might have pronounced done down, but equally cron instead of... Sorry, done, crun. They wouldn't say crun for crown, that can't be right. But yeah, it's roughly heroic couplets. What about the meter? Is it iambic pentameter? No monarch, but would give his crown... Hold on. No monarch, but would give his crown. That's tetrameter, not pentameter. His arms might do what this has done. Yeah, that's not pentameter. Nothing wrong with it. Nice iambic tetrameter. It's okay, I suppose it isn't heroic couplets, but you can see it's a closely related form. So, I'll read it once more, and then if there's anything anyone would like discussed, please leave a comment in chat. On a girdle, that which her slender waist confined, shall now my joyous temples bind. No monarch would give his crown, his arms might do what this has done. It was my heaven's extremest sphere, the pale which held that lovely dear. My joy, my grief, my hope, my love, did all within this circle move. A narrow compass, and yet there dwell all that's good and all that's fair. Give me but what this ribbon bound, take all the rest, the sun goes round. And we have song, which I assume isn't the title of the piece, but the closest approximation that the author of this anthology could come up with. So, go lovely rose, tell her that wastes her time and me, that now she knows, when I resemble her to thee, how sweet and fair she seems to be. Tell her that's young, and shuns to have her graces spied, that hadst thou sprung in deserts where no man abide, thou must have uncommended died. Small is the worth of beauty from the light retired, bid her come forth, suffer herself to be desired, and not blush so to be admired. Then die, that she, the common fate of all things rare, may read in thee how small a part of time they share, that are so wondrous, sweet and fair. Interesting, this one seems a little more complex. Okay, the first stanza I like. So he's actually addressing a rose directly about his lover, which is a curious little reversal there. Because there are plenty of poems that where a lover is being addressed and compared to a rose, but this is the first I'm aware of where a rose is addressed and compared to one's lover. So, go lovely rose, tell her that wastes her time and me. So, the person that wastes her time and myself, that now she knows, when I resemble her to thee, how sweet and fair she seems to be. So then we have, tell her that's young, and shuns to have her graces spied, that hadst thou sprung in deserts where no men abide, thou must have uncommended died. So I think that's a light censure against modesty. I could be wrong. But the point being that why shun those admiring you when, were there no people to admire, then you would live a life entirely uncommended. Some might argue that that slightly misses the point, but you can certainly feel his sentiments, I'd suggest. Small is the worth of beauty from the light retired. Bid her come forth, suffer herself to be desired, and not blush so to be admired. So again, this is continuing the same thought that was introduced in the previous stanza. Then die, that she, the common fate of all things rare, may read in thee how small a part of time they share, that are so wondrous sweet and fair. So that's just a caution about mortality. The speaker is commanding the rose to die, to make the point to his lover that life is short, especially for the best things in life, it would seem. So enjoy them while you can. At least that's what I think it's saying. If you disagree, by all means, leave a comment in chat. I notice the form is a lot more irregular this time. We have 4 syllables in the first line. Eight in the next, 4 in the next. Another 8. Another 8. Yeah, looks like that continues. 4, 8, 4, 8, 8. Which is interesting. What about rhyming? A, B, A, B, B. I don't recognise that form. But I like it. Seems very expressive. Not to mention having a pleasantly organised structure on top of that. Very nice. So I will move on to the final reading and then on to the next poem. Again, if you have any comments or anything you'd like to discuss, please drop a message in chat. Go, lovely rose, tell her that wastes her time in me, that now she knows, when I resemble her to thee, how sweet and fair she seems to be. Tell her that's young and shuns to have her graces spied, that hadst thou sprung in deserts where no men abide, thou must have uncommended died. Small is the worth of beauty from the light retired. Bid her come forth, suffer herself to be desired, and not blush so to be admired. Then die, that she, the common fate of all things rare, may read in thee how small a part of time they share, that are so wondrous sweet and fair. It is interesting that the poem seems to encourage the subject of the poem. No, I suppose I mean the object, don't I? The object of the poem, who we would assume is the speaker's lover. It's urging her not to blush and essentially not to be troubled by male attentions. What I find so interesting about that is because certainly in later periods the exact opposite would have been the expectation. Women would have been expected to blush if they felt overly put upon by male desire. That would have been seen the correct and proper way to behave. So it's interesting that this poem seems to suggest otherwise. I'm not sure if it's countercultural for its period, or if it's just an indication that values changed relatively rapidly. If the latter, then that may also help to explain why this poet's body of work was fell in significance so quickly after his death. Ooh, we're on to Wordsworth now. I don't know much about Wordsworth, but I do recognise him as a very significant writer in the English language. Very significant. So, William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth was an English romantic poet who, with Samuel Taylor Coleridge, helped to launch the Romantic Age in English literature with their joint publication, Lyrical Ballads. Wordsworth's magnum opus is generally considered to be The Prelude, a semi-autobiographical poem of his early years that he revised and expanded a number of times. It was posthumously titled and published by his wife in the year of his death, before which it was generally known as the Poem to Coleridge. Wordsworth was Poet Laureate from 1843 until his death from pleurisy on the 23rd of April 1850. Pleuritis is an inflammation of the membranes that surround the lungs and that line the chest cavity. Ooh, that does not sound pleasant. This can result in a sharp chest pain while breathing. Occasionally the pain may be a constant dull ache. Oh dear. That's not ideal. And he was followed by Alfred Lord Tennyson as Poet Laureate, and preceded by Robert Southey, whose work I think we've also looked at. So let's read through a bit about his life. The second of 5 children born to John Wordsworth and Anne Cookson, William Wordsworth was born on the 7th of April 1770 in what is now named Wordsworth House in Cockermouth, Cumberland, now in Cumbria, part of the scenic region in northwestern England known as the Lake District. William's sister, the poet and diarist Dorothy Wordsworth, to whom he was close all his life, was born the following year, and the two were baptised together. Oh, I didn't know they did that. I thought the practice was always to baptise fairly early, in the first year of life. I didn't realise they would sometimes wait and then baptise 2 children together. Then again, there's no citation for that. They had 3 other siblings: Richard, the eldest, who became a lawyer; John, born after Dorothy, went to sea and died in 1805 when the ship of which he was captain, the Earl of Abergavenny, was wrecked off the south coast of England; and Christopher, the youngest, who entered the church and rose to the Master of Trinity College, Cambridge. Wordsworth's father was a legal representative of James Lowther, 1st Earl of Lonsdale, and through his connections lived in a large mansion in the small town. He was frequently away from home on business, so the young William and his siblings had little involvement with him and remained distant from him until his death in 1783. However, he did encourage William in his reading, and in particular set him to commit large portions of verse to memory, including works by Milton, Shakespeare and Spenser. Interesting. It was Spenser that wrote The Fairy Queen, wasn't it? Yes, during Elizabeth I's reign. William was also allowed to use his father's library. William also spent time at his mother's parents' home in Penrith, Cumberland, where he was exposed to the Moors, but did not get along with his grandparents or his uncle, who also lived there. His hostile interactions with them distressed him to the point of contemplating suicide. Ooh, is rather unfortunate. No one wants to go through that. Wordsworth was taught to read by his mother and attended first a tiny school of low quality in Cockermouth, then a school in Penrith for the children of upper-class families, where he was taught by Anne Burkitt, who insisted on instilling in her students traditions that included pursuing both scholarly and local activities, especially the festivals around Easter, May Day, and Shrove Tuesday. Wordsworth was taught both the Bible and the Spectator. What do they mean by the Spectator? The Spectator was a daily publication founded by Joseph Addison and Richard Steele in England, lasting from 1711 to 1712. Each paper or number was approximately 2,500 words long, and the original run consisted of 555 numbers. Huh. That's interesting. I mean, with a title like Spectator, you'd think it was a newspaper, but that sounds like it isn't what it was. It sounds more like a scholarly work. Anyway, but little else. It was at school in Penrith that he met Hutchinsons, including Mary, who later became his wife. Met the Hutchinsons. After the death of Wordsworth's mother in 1778, his father sent him to Hawkshead Grammar School in Lancashire, now in Cumbria, and sent Dorothy to live with relatives in Yorkshire. She and William did not meet again for 9 years. Wordsworth made his debut as writer in 1787 when he published a sonnet in the European magazine. The same year he began attending St John's College, Cambridge. He received his bachelor's degree in 1791. He returned to Hawkshead for the first 2 summers of his time at Cambridge, and often spent later holidays on walking tours, visiting places famous for the beauty of their landscape. In 1790 he went on a walking tour of Europe, during which he toured the Alps extensively and visited nearby areas of France, Switzerland and Italy. Relationship with Annette Vallon. In November 1791, Wordsworth visited revolutionary France and became enchanted with the Republican movement. I understand that there was actually quite a lot of sympathy for the Republican movement prior to the revolution, and then when the revolution took place and was so bloody, then the British romanticisation and support for it rather fell away. He fell in love with a French woman, Annette Vallon, who in 1792 gave birth to their daughter Caroline. Financial problems and Britain's tense relations with France forced him to return to England alone the following year. The circumstances of his return and his subsequent behaviour raised doubts as to his declared wish to marry Annette. However, he supported her and his daughter as best he could in later life. The Reign of Terror left Wordsworth thoroughly disillusioned with the French Revolution, and the outbreak of armed hostilities between Britain and France prevented him from seeing Annette and his daughter for some years. With the Peace of Amiens again allowing travel to France, in 1802 Wordsworth and his sister Dorothy visited Annette and Caroline in Calais. The purpose of the visit was to prepare Annette for the fact of his forthcoming marriage to Mary Hutchinson. Afterward he wrote the sonnet, "It is a beauteous evening, calm and free," recalling a seaside walk with the 9-year-old Caroline, whom he had never seen before that visit. Mary was anxious that Wordsworth should do more for Caroline. Upon Caroline's marriage in 1816, Wordsworth settled £30 a year on her, equivalent to 2,313 in 2021. I wonder how they're figuring that out, because I wonder how they've reached that conclusion, because it's not very meaningful to do simple translations like that, because the relative costs of goods and labour over time change substantially. I mean, £2,313 in today's money per year is a tiny, insignificant amount, but back then I suspect it could probably have supported a family in relatively poor condition, but could have actually supported them for a year. I don't know, but I suspect they could have got enough food to live off of that, as well as rent. Could be wrong. Anyway, payments which continued until 1835, when they were replaced by a capital settlement. Early career. The year 1793 saw the first publication of poems by Wordsworth in the collections An Evening Walk and Descriptive Sketches. In 1785 he received a legacy of £900 from Raisley Calvert and became able to pursue a career as a poet. You see, because if you do the same conversion up there, assuming they've even done it correctly, that's only 30 times the quantity. So 30 times 2,313 is going to be what? It's going to be nearly 17,000. Sorry, 70,000 I meant. Nearly 70,000, I think. It would be strange to think you could give someone £70,000 and then, oh, they're set for a career as a poet today. Anyway, where was I? It was also in 1795 that he met Samuel Taylor Coleridge in Somerset. The two poets quickly developed a close friendship. For 2 years from 1795, William and his sister Dorothy lived at Racedown House in Dorset, a property of the Pinney family, to the west of Pilsdon Pen. They walked in the area for about 2 hours every day, and the nearby hills consoled Dorothy as she pined for the fells of her native Lakeland, she wrote. We have hills which, seen from a distance, almost take the character of mountains, some cultivated nearly to their summits, others in their wild state covered with furze and broom. These delight me the most as they remind me of our native wilds. In 1797 the pair moved to Alfoxden House, Somerset, just a few miles away from Coleridge's home in Nether Stowey. Together Wordsworth and Coleridge, with insights from Dorothy, produced lyrical ballads, an important work in the English Romantic movement. The volume gave neither Wordsworth nor Coleridge's name as author. One of the Wordsworth's most famous poems, Tintern Abbey, was published in this collection, along with Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. The second edition, published in 1800, had only Wordsworth listed the author and included a preface to the poems. It was augmented significantly in the next edition, published in 1802, and this preface, which some scholars consider a central work, in this preface, which some scholars consider a central work of Romantic literary theory, Wordsworth discusses what he sees as the elements of a new type of verse, one that is based on the ordinary language really used by men, while avoiding the poetic diction of much 18th century verse. Wordsworth also gives his famous definition of poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility. And calls his own poems in the book experimental. A fourth and final edition of lyrical ballads was published in 1805. The Borderers. Between 1795 and 1797, Wordsworth wrote his only play, The Borderers, a first tragedy set during the reign of King Henry III of England, when Englishmen in the North Country came into conflict with Scottish border reivers. He attempted to get the play staged in November 1907. In November 1797, but was rejected by Thomas Harris, the manager of the Covent Garden Theatre, who proclaimed it impossible that the play should succeed in the representation. The rebuff was not received lightly by Wordsworth, and the play was not published until 1842 after substantial revision. Yeah, I think we can probably stop there for now. Again, we could go back if we want further details, but I think that gives us a good idea of who he was and how that relates to his poetry. Particularly what we read about the preface to his, was it lyrical ballads, I think? In which he describes his perspective on poetry and its clear relevance to the beginning of the Romantic period of poetry. So, let's start with She Dwelt Among the Untrodden Ways. She dwelt among the untrodden ways, beside the springs of Dove, a maid whom there were none to praise, and very few to love. A violet by a mossy stone, half hidden from the eye, fair as a star when only one is shining in the sky. She lived unknown, and few could know when Lucy ceased to be, but she is in her grave, and oh, the difference to me. That is an interesting poem. I mean, on the face of it, you've got the themes of love and death, which are absolutely everywhere within poetry as we've seen. At least, older poetry. But, strictly speaking, I don't think anywhere does it establish a relationship between the speaker and the object of the poem, Lucy. So I wonder if it is supposed to be taken as at face value of the death of an individual who lived in obscurity, which in itself gives it seems reminiscent of what was it called? An elegy written in a churchyard? Elegy written in a country churchyard by Keats, although that was later on, so it should be noted. Wait, was it later on? Oh, I am absolutely... No, I'm talking absolute rubbish. It wasn't by Keats, it was by Thomas Gray, and it was published in 1750. So it does predate Wordsworth. Yep, I was talking absolute rubbish. I apologise for that. My memory. Anyway, so yes. In some ways, it resembles elegy written in a country court in a country churchyard. Yes. Sorry. But I do wonder if we're actually supposed to interpret this in a slightly more complex way in terms of the idea of losing someone as opposed to the actual fact of it. How could I elaborate? So, for example, when someone passes away, one thing people are likely to ask is, did they pass away peacefully? This is because people, of course, would rather prefer the idea of someone going away in a tranquil way than in an unpleasant way. Well, that in itself creates a sense of emotion. Creates emotion, I should say. When we read about the death of William Wordsworth to pleurisy, and I was talking about how that's an unpleasant way to go. Like, you feel a bit of emotion. I should think that, it's unpleasant to think of someone going in that way. Well, my point is, the very idea of someone going unpleasantly is in itself an emotional thing, even if it's not attached to a real living person, and that's what I'm getting at here. I do wonder, is this actually supposed to be interpreted as a poem about someone dying in obscurity, or about the emotion one feels when they think of someone dying in obscurity? Almost in a sort of meta-poetic sense, I could be wrong, perhaps I'm making this up. If you strongly disagree then, or if you have anything at all to say about this interpretation, by all means leave a comment and I will read it shortly. But still, as far as the form of this poem goes, it seems to be a ballad. Yes, it seems to be in the form of a ballad, which is interesting. So I'll read it once more and then we'll move on to the next one. She dwelt among the untrodden ways beside the springs of Dove, a maid whom there were none to praise and very few to love, a violet by a mossy stone half hidden from the eye, fair as a star when only one is shining in the sky. She lived unknown and few could know when Lucy ceased to be, but she is in her grave and oh, the difference to me. See, the reason I wonder if it's more meta is because the poem really emphasizes the fact that she lived unknown and few would have even been aware when she died and so on, and there is no connection made between the speaker and her. That's why I wonder whether we are supposed to assume the speaker knew her at all. Anyway, on to the next one. She was a phantom of delight. She was a phantom of delight when first she gleamed upon my sight, a lovely apparition sent to be a moment's ornament. Her eyes as stars of twilight fair, like twilight too her dusky hair, but all things else about her drawn from Maytime and the cheerful dawn, a dancing shape and image gay, to haunt, to startle, and waylay. I saw her upon nearer view, a spirit yet a woman too, her household motions light and free, and steps of virgin liberty. A continence in which did meet, sweet records, promises as sweet, a creature not too bright or good for human nature's daily for human nature's daily food. For transient sorrows, simple wiles, praise, blame, love, kisses, tears and smiles. And now I see with eye serene the very pulse of the machine, a being breathing thoughtful breath, a traveller between life and death, the reason firm, the temperate will, endurance, foresight, strength and skill, a perfect woman, nobly planned, to warn, to comfort and command, and yet a spirit still and bright, with something of angelic light. Well, that's quite a remarkable poem in its way, isn't it? It does seem to be yet another just praising the object and upon which your affections fall type poem. But it does seem rather good, doesn't it? Rather skillfully put together. I notice it seems to be written in rhyming couplets, with most of it being in tetrameter. I didn't notice if it was entirely tetrameter, but most of it seems to be. To warn, to comfort and command, that could be... That doesn't necessarily come across in the best light today, does it? Still, overall, quite nice. So I will give this one a final reading. Again, as always, if there's anything you'd like to discuss, please leave a comment and we will do so. And after reading this once more, I will move on to the next. She was a phantom of delight when first she gleamed upon my sight, a lovely apparition sent to be a moment's ornament. Her eyes as stars of twilight fair, like twilight too her dusky hair, but all things else about her drawn from Maytime and the cheerful dawn, a dancing shape and image gay, to haunt, to startle, and waylay. I saw upon nearer view a spirit, yet a woman too, her household motions light and free, and steps of virgin liberty, a continent in which did meet sweet records, promises as sweet, a creature not too bright or good for human nature's daily food, for transient sorrows, simple wiles, praise, blame, love, kisses, tears, and smiles. And now I see with eye serene the very pulse of the machine, a being breathing thoughtful breath, a traveller between life and death, the reason firm, the temperate will, endurance, foresight, strength, and skill, a perfect woman nobly planned, to warn, to comfort, and command, and yet a spirit still and bright, with something of angelic light. What's that one called again? She was a phantom of delight. Now we move on to Sonnet, written by Wordsworth, it would seem. There are different forms of sonnet, aren't there? There's the Shakespearean and the... what was the other main one? Petrarchan, was it? And wasn't there a Spenserian as well? Or have I made that up? Just a second. Petrarchan and Shakespearean sonnets. Perhaps I was confused when I said Spenserian. Perhaps that's a different form altogether. Sorry, I'm just trying to quickly find a reference to the differences in the form. Petrarchan sonnets, the first 8 lines, they're separated into 8 and 6 line stanzas, one of each. The octave, that is the first part of 8 lines, the first stanza of 8 lines, has an ABBA rhyming scheme, and the sestet, the final 6, is CDE, CDE, and CDC, CDC is also quite common. The Shakespearean form is 14 lines, where you have 3 quatrains and 1 couplet, in that order. A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, and then G, G. Since that's all about rhyming, I'm just going to assume that they tend to be in iambic pentameter. So, where were we? Although I would notice if these are supposed to be sonnets... Hold on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay. Hold on, just verifying something quickly. Okay, previously I was thinking of a Spenserian stanza. That is something completely and utterly different. Okay. We will... I've noticed something odd about this, but we will address it after we've read it, so I will get on with it now. Part 1, 33. Not sure what that's a reference to, but apparently that identifies this particular sonnet. The world is too much with us, late and soon. Getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours. We have given our hearts away, a sordid boon. The sea that bears her bosom to the moon, that winds that will be howling at all hours, and are upgathered now like sleeping flowers. For this, for everything, we are out of tune. It moves us not, great God, I'd rather be a pagan suckled in a creed outworn. So might I, standing on this pleasant lay, have glimpses that would make me less forlorn, have sight of Proteus rising from the sea. Oh, that's probably Proteus. Or hear old Triton blow his wreathed horn. I think that is an iambic pentameter. The thing that I thought was interesting is it begins like a Petrarchan sonnet, but then, sorry, we have the octet at the top, and then the final 6, the sestet, doesn't have the rhyming scheme I was expecting. It's an A-B, A-B, A-B rhyming scheme, not an A-B-C, A-B-C, or A... what was the other one? Was it A-B, A-A, B-A? I think so. Let me double check that, because I wouldn't want to confidently mislead anyone. Yes, that's correct. Which is interesting. I don't know if this form has a name or not. As for the meaning of the poetry, I think it's lamenting the fact that people no longer appreciate nature in to the extent that they did in pagan times, despite the fact that nature is amazing and wonderful. Could be wrong. but that's what it seems like to me. Nice little poem in its way. So I'll move on to the final reading of this one, and then we will look at the next poem. The world is too much with us, late and soon. Getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Little we see in nature that is ours. We have given our hearts away, a sordid boon. This sea that bears her bosom to the moon, the winds that will be howling at all hours, and are upgathered now like sleeping flowers. For this, for everything, we are out of tune. It moves us not, great God, I'd rather be a pagan suckled in a creed outworn. So might I, standing on this pleasant lay, have glimpses that would make me less forlorn, have sight of Proteus rising from the sea, or hear old Triton blow his wreath torn. Interesting, the accent there on the E. I think that's telling us to hit it hard. But wouldn't that mean that that must be a feminine ending and an 11th syllable? Let me check. Or hear old Triton blow his wreath. That doesn't work. Wreathed. Or hear old Triton blow his wreathed horn. Yeah, that doesn't work at all. That would have to have been a demoted syllable. Perhaps that is what they're signifying, I'm not sure. Anyway, we move on to part 2, 36, composed upon Westminster Bridge, September the 3rd, 1802. Earth has not anything to show more fair, dull would be the soul who could pass by, so a sight so touching in its majesty. The city now doth like a garment wear, the beauty of the morning silent bare. Ships, towers, domes, theatres, and temples lie upon open unto the fields and to the sky. All bright and glittering in the smokeless air, never did sun more beautifully steep in his first splendour valley, rock or hill, never saw I, never felt a calm so deep. The river gildeth at his own sweet will. Dear God, the very houses seem asleep, and that the mighty heart is lying still. And all that mighty heart is lying still. Again, we see the A-B rhyming in the sestet, which is interesting. Oh, the river glideth. I think I may have misread that. Seems to be just a poem praising the beauty of London, seen from Westminster Bridge at that time. Certainly there's something touching about seeing the beauty in your everyday surroundings. Anyway, I'll move on to the final reading, and then we'll start on Frankenstein for this week. So, earth has not anything to show more fair, dull would be he of soul who could pass by, a sight so touching in its majesty, the city now doth like a garment wear, the beauty of the morning, silent, bare, ships, towers, domes, theatres, and temples lie open unto the fields and to the sky, all bright and glittering in the smokeless air. Never did sun more beautifully steep in his first splendour valley, rock, or hill. Never saw I, never felt a calm so deep. The river glideth at his own sweet will. Dear God, the very houses seem asleep, and all that mighty heart is lying still. Frankenstein. Last week we began on chapter 11. So, to recap. Chapter 11. The creature describes his earliest experiences from learning how to see and hear, learning how to survive in the world, his first encounters with man, unpleasant as they were, and finally his finding shelter in a hovel adjoined to a cottage. The creature described how through a small chink in the cottage wall he began to observe his clueless neighbours and unknowing landlords. They appeared to be a party of one young man, one young woman, and an old man. Chapter 12. The creature learns that the cottagers are unhappy and begins to help them in secret by performing manual tasks to their benefit at night. He begins to learn the cottagers' names and language. The young man is Felix and the young woman Agatha. In chapter 13, a lady arriving on horseback joins the cottagers, later to be dubbed the Arabian by the creature. The creature realises she must have a language of her own, since she and the cottagers do not seem able to mutually understand each other. The cottagers begin teaching her their language, including literacy, from which the creature also learns. Incidentally, he also learns about history, society, and culture. In chapter 14, the creature learns the recent history of the cottagers. The old man was de Lacy, and they had fallen foul of French law whilst helping a Turkish Muslim friend escape prison, to which he had been wrongfully sent. Now they live in exile. The Arabian lady, whose name was Safi, is the Christian daughter of the wrongfully imprisoned Turkish friend. Once it became clear that the de Lacy family had lost their wealth and rank, the Turkish friend had tried to cut ties with them altogether and force his daughter into accompanying him to Turkey where, as a woman, she felt she had poor prospects. So she ran away to be with the exiled and newly impoverished de Lacy family, in turn honouring an agreement that she would marry the young man, something her father had agreed to but had never intended to go through with, even before the de Lacy family's fall from grace. The creature provides Victor with letters from Safi to Felix as evidence of the veracity of his story. And that's where we left off. So, chapter 15. Such was the history of my beloved cottagers. It impressed me deeply. I learned from the views of social life which it developed, to admire their virtues and to deprecate the vices of mankind. As yet I looked upon crime as a distant evil. Benevolence and generosity were ever present before me, inciting within me a desire to become an actor in the busy scene where so many admirable qualities were called forth and displayed. But in giving an account of the progress of my intellect, I must not omit a circumstance which occurred in the beginning of the month of August of the same year. One night, during my accustomed visit to the neighbouring wood, where I collected my own food and brought home firing for my protectors, I found on the ground a leathern portmanteau? Oops. There we go. A large travelling case, usually made of leather and opening into two equal sections. Ah, it's portmanteau, I think. Is it? Oh. Toe. Yeah, I think it's portmanteau. Anyway. So it's a leather travelling bag. Containing several articles of dress and some books. I eagerly seized the prize and returned it to my hovel. Fortunately, the books were written in the language. the elements of which I had acquired at the cottage. They consisted of Paradise Lost, a volume of Plutarch's Lives, and The Sorrows of Werther. The possession of these treasures gave me extreme delight. I now continually studied and exercised my mind upon these histories, whilst my friends were employed in their ordinary occupations. I can hardly describe to you the effect of these books. They produced in me an infinity of new images and feelings that sometimes raised me to ecstasy, but more frequently sunk me into the lowest dejection. Interesting. I'm familiar with Paradise Lost. Haven't read it, but I know of it. Plutarch's Lives and Sorrows of Werther are new to me. In The Sorrows of Werther, besides the interest of its simple and affecting story, so many opinions are canvassed and so many lights thrown upon what had hitherto been to me obscure subjects that I found it a never-ending source of speculation and astonishment. The gentle and domestic manners it described, combined with lofty sentiments and feelings which had for their object something out of self, accorded well with my experience among my protectors, and with the wants which were forever alive in my own bosom. But I thought Werther himself a more divine being than I had ever beheld or imagined. His character contained no pretension, but it sunk deep. The disquisitions upon death and suicide were calculated to fill me with wonder. I did not pretend to enter into the merits of the case, yet I inclined towards the opinion of the hero, whose extinction I wept, without precisely understanding it. As I read, however, I applied much personally to my own feelings and conditions. I found myself similar, yet at the same time strangely unlike to the beings consuming who I read, and to whose conversations I was a listener. I sympathized with and partly understood them, but I was unformed in mind, I was dependent on none, and related to none. The path of my departure was free, and there was none to lament my annihilation. My person was hideous, and my stature gigantic. What did this mean? Who was I? What was I? Whence did I come? What was my destination? These questions continually recurred, but I was unable to solve them. The volume of Plutarch's Lives which I possessed contained the histories of the first founders of the ancient republics. This book had a far different effect upon me from The Sorrows of Werther. I learned from Werther's imagination despondency and gloom, but Plutarch taught me high thoughts. He elevated me above the wretched sphere of my own reflections, to admire and love the heroes of past ages. Many things I read surpassed my understanding and experience. I had a very confused knowledge of kingdoms, wide extents of country, mighty rivers and boundless seas, but was perfectly unacquainted with towns and large assemblages of men. The cottage of my protectors had been the only school on which I had studied human nature, but this book developed new and mightier scenes of action. I read of men concerned in public affairs, governing or massacring their species. I felt the greatest ardour for virtue rise within me, and abhorrence for vice, as far as I understood the signification of those terms, relative as they were, as I applied them, to pleasure and pain alone. Induced by these feelings, I was of course led to admire peaceable lawgivers, Numa, Solon, and Lycurgus, in preference to Romulus and Theseus. The patriarchal lives of my protectors caused these impressions to take a firm hold on my mind. Perhaps if my first introduction to humanity had been made by a young soldier burning for glory and slaughter, I should have been imbued with different sensations. But Paradise Lost excited different and far deeper emotions. I read it, as I had read the other volumes which had fallen into my hands, as a true history. It moved every feeling of wonder and awe that the picture of an omnipotent God warring with his creatures was capable of exciting. I often referred the several situations as their similarities struck me to my own. Like Adam, I was apparently united by no link to any other being in existence, but his state was far different from mine in every other respect. He had come forth from the hands of God, a perfect creature, happy and prosperous, guarded by the especial care of his Creator. He was allowed to converse with and acquire knowledge from beings of superior nature. But I was wretched, helpless, and alone. Many times I considered Satan as the fitter emblem of my condition, for often, like him, when I viewed the bliss of my protectors, the bitter gall of envy rose within me. Another circumstance strengthened and confirmed these feelings. Soon after my arrival in the hovel, I discovered some papers in the pocket of the dress which I had taken from the laboratory. First I neglected them, but now that I was able to decipher the characters on which they were written, I began to study them with diligence. It was your journal of the 4 months that preceded my creation. You minutely described in these papers every step you took in the progress of your work. This history was mingled with accounts of domestic occurrences. You, doubtless, recollect these papers. Here they are. Everything is related in them which bears reference to my accursed origin. The whole details of that series of disgusting circumstances which produced it is set in view. The minutest description of my odious and loathsome person is given, in language which painted your own horrors and rendered mine indelible. I sickened as I read. Hateful day when I received life. I exclaimed in agony, accursed creature, why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turned from me in disgust? God in pity made man beautiful and alluring after his own image, but my form is a filthy type of yours, more horrid even from the very resemblance. Satan had his companions, fellow devils, to admire and encourage him, but I am solitary and am horrid. These were the reflections of my hours of despondency and solitude, but when I contemplated the virtues of the cottagers, their amiable and benevolent dispositions, I persuaded myself that when they should become acquainted with my admiration of their virtues, they would compassionate me, and overlook my personal deformity. Could they turn from their door one, however monstrous, who solicited their compassion and friendship? I resolved at least not to despair, but in every way to fit myself for an interview with them when they would decide my fate. I postponed this attempt for some months longer, for the importance attached to its success inspired with me a dread lest I should fail. Besides, I found that my understanding improved so much with every day's experience that I was unwilling to commence this undertaking until a few more months should have added to my sagacity. Several changes in the meantime took place in the cottage. The presence of Safie diffused happiness among its inhabitants, and also found that a greater degree of plenty reigned there. Felix and Agatha spent more time in amusement and conversation, and were assisted in their labours by servants. They did not appear rich, but they were contented and happy. Their feelings were serene and peaceful, while mine became every day more tumultuous. Increase of knowledge only discovered to me more clearly what a wretched outcast I was. I cherished hope, it is true, but it vanished when I beheld my person reflected in water, or my shadow in the moonshine, even as that frail image and that inconstant shade. I endeavoured to crush these fears and to fortify myself for the trial which in a few months I resolved to undergo, and sometimes I allowed my thoughts, unchecked by reason, to ramble in the fields of paradise, and dared to fancy amiable and lovely creatures sympathizing with my feelings and cheering my gloom. Their angelic countenances breathed smiles of consolation, but it was all a dream. No Eve soothed my sorrows, nor shared my thoughts. I was alone. I remembered Adam's supplication to his Creator, but where was mine? He had abandoned me, and in the bitterness of my heart I cursed him. Autumn passed thus. I saw with surprising grief the leaves decay and fall, and nature again assumed the barren and bleak appearance it had worn when I first beheld the woods and the lovely moon. Yet I did not heed the bleakness of the weather. I was better fitted by my conformation for the endurance of cold than heat. But my chief delights were the sight of the flowers, the birds, and all the gay apparel of summer. When those deserted me, I turned with more attention towards the cottagers. Their happiness was not decreased by the absence of summer. They loved and sympathized with one another, and their joys, depending on each other, were not interrupted by the casualties that took place around them. The more I saw of them, the greater became my desire to claim their protection and kindness. My heart yearned to be known and loved by these amiable creatures. To see their sweet looks directed towards me with affection was the utmost limit of my ambition. I dared not think that they would turn them from me with disdain and horror. The poor that stopped at their door were never driven away. I asked, it is true, for greater treasures than a little food or rest. I required kindness and sympathy, but I did not believe myself utterly unworthy of it. The winter advanced, and an entire revolution of the seasons had taken place since I awoke into life. My attentions at this time were solely directed towards my plan of introducing myself into the cottage of my protectors. I revolved many projects, but that on which I finally fixed was to enter the dwelling when the blind old man should be alone. I had sagacity enough to discover that the unnatural hideousness of my person was the chief object of horror with those who had formerly beheld me. My voice, although harsh, had nothing terrible in it. I thought, therefore, that if, in the absence of his children, I could gain the goodwill and meditation of the old de Lacy, I might, by his means, be tolerated by my younger protectors. One day, when the sun shone and the red leaves strewed the ground and diffused cheerfulness, although it denied warmth, Sephi, Agatha, and Felix departed on a long country walk, and the old man, at his own desire, was left alone in the cottage. When his children had departed, he took up his guitar and played several mournful but sweet airs, more sweet and mournful than I had ever heard him play before. At first his countenance was illuminated with pleasure, but as he continued, thoughtfulness and sadness succeeded. At length, laying aside the instrument, he sat absorbed in reflection. My heart beat quick. This was the hour and moment of trial, which would decide my hopes or realize my fears. The servants were gone to a neighbouring fair. All was silent in and around the cottage. It was an excellent opportunity, yet when I proceeded to execute my plan, my limbs failed me, and I sank to the ground. Again I rose, and exerting all the firmness of which I was master, removed the planks which I had placed before my hovel to conceal my retreat. The fresh air revived me, and with renewed determination I approached the door of the cottage. I knocked. "Who is there?" said the old man. "Come in." I entered. "Pardon this intrusion," I said. "I am a traveller in want of a little rest. You would greatly oblige me if you would allow me to remain a few minutes before the fire." "Enter," said De Lacy, "and I will try in what manner I can to relieve your wants. But unfortunately my children are away from home, and as I am blind, I am afraid I shall find it difficult to procure food for you." "Do not trouble yourself, my kind host. I have food. It is warmth and rest only that I need." I sat down, and a silence ensued. I knew that every minute was precious to me, yet remained irresolute in what manner to commence the interview, when the old man addressed me. "By your language, stranger, I suppose you are my countryman. Are you French?" "No, but I was educated by a French family, and understand that language only. I am now going to claim the protection of some friends whom I sincerely love, and of whose favour I have some hopes." "Are they Germans?" "No, they are French. But let us change the subject. I am an unfortunate and deserted creature. I look around, I have no relation or friend upon the earth. These amiable people to whom I go have never seen me, and know little of me. I am full of fears, for if I fail there, I am an outcast in the world forever." "Do not despair. To be friendless is indeed to be unfortunate, but the hearts of men, when unprejudiced by any obvious self-interest, are full of brotherly love and charity. Rely therefore on your hopes, and if these friends are good and amiable, do not despair. They are kind, they are the most excellent creatures in the world, but unfortunately they are prejudiced against me. I have good dispositions, my life has been hitherto harmless, and in some degrees beneficial, but fatal prejudice clouds their eyes, and where they ought to see a feeling and kind friend, they behold only a detestable monster. That is indeed unfortunate, but if you are really blameless, cannot you undeceive them? I am about to undertake that task. It is on that account that I feel so many overwhelming terrors. I tenderly love these friends. I have, unknown to them, been for many months in the habits of daily kindness towards them, but they believe that I wish to injure them, and it is that prejudice which I wish to overcome. Where do these friends reside? Near this spot." The old man paused and then continued. "If you will unreservedly confide to me the particulars of your tale, I perhaps may be of use in undeceiving them. I am blind and cannot judge of your countenance, but there is something in your words which persuades me that you are sincere. I am poor and an exile, but it will afford me true pleasure to be in any way serviceable to a human creature." "Excellent man, I thank you and accept your generous offer. You raise me from the dust by this kindness, and I trust that you, by your aid, I shall not be driven from the society and sympathy of your fellow creatures." "Heaven forbid! Even if you were really criminal, for that can only drive you to desperation, and not instigate you to virtue. I also am unfortunate. I and my family have been condemned, although innocent. Judge, therefore, if I do not feel for your misfortunes. How can I thank you, my best and only benefactor? From your lips first have I heard the voice of kindness directed towards me. I shall be forever grateful, and your present humanity assures me of success with those friends who I am on the point of meeting. I know the names and residence of those friends." I paused. This, I thought, was a moment of decision which was to rob me of or bestow happiness on me forever. I struggled vainly for firmness sufficient to answer him, but the effort destroyed all my remaining strength. I sank on the chair and sobbed aloud. At that moment I heard the steps of my younger protectors. I had not a moment to lose, but seizing the hands of the old man, I cried, "Now is the time. Save and protect me. You and your family are the friends whom I seek. Do not desert me in the hour of trial." "Great God!" exclaimed the old man. "Who are you?" At that instant the cottage door was open, and Felix, Sephi, and Agatha entered. Who can describe their horror and consternation on beholding me? Agatha fainted, and Sephi, unable to attend to her friend, rushed out of the cottage. Felix darted forward, and with supernatural force tore me from his father, to whose knees I clung. In a transport of fury, he dashed me to the ground and struck me violently with a stick. I could have torn him limb from limb, as the lion rends the antelope, but my heart sunk within me as with bitter sickness, and I refrained. I saw him on the point of repeating his blows, when, overcome by pain and anguish, I quitted the cottage, and in the general tumult escaped unperceived to my hovel. Chapter 16. Cursed, Creator, why did I live? Why in that instant did I not extinguish the spark of existence which you had so wantonly bestowed? I know not. Despair had not yet taken possession of me. My feelings were those of rage and revenge. I could with pleasure have destroyed the cottage and its inhabitants, and have glutted myself with their shrieks and misery. When night came, I quitted my retreat and wandered in the wood, and now, no longer restrained by the fears of discovery, I gave vent to my anguish in fearful howlings. I was like a wild beast that had broken the toils. Broken the toils? I wonder what they mean by that. I'm aware of a toil as in work. Labour, work, especially of a grueling nature, troubles strife. A net or snare, any thread, web or string spread for taking prey. Interesting. Usually in the plural. I was like a wild beast that had broken the toils, destroying the objects that obstructed me, and ranging through the wood with a stag-like swiftness. Oh, what a miserable night I passed! The cold stars shone in mockery, and the bare trees waved their branches above me. Now and then the sweet voice of a bird burst forth amidst the universal stillness. All save I were at the rest or in enjoyment. I, like the arch-fiend, bore a hell within me, and finding myself unsympathized with, wished to tear up the trees, spread havoc and destruction around me, and then have sat down and enjoyed the ruin. But this was a luxurious sensation that could not endure. I became fatigued with excess of bodily exertion, and sank on the damp grass in the sick impotence of despair. There was none among the myriads of men that existed who would pity or assist me. And should I feel kindness towards my enemies? No. From that moment I declared everlasting war against the species, and, more than all, against him who had formed me and sent me forth to this insupportable misery. The sun rose. I heard the voices of men, and knew that it was impossible to return to my retreat during that day. Accordingly, I hid myself in some thick underwood, determining to devote the ensuing hours to reflection on my situation. The pleasant sunshine and the pure air of day restored me to some degree of tranquillity, and when I considered what had passed at the cottage, I could not help believing that I had been too hasty in my conclusions. I certainly acted imprudently. It was apparent that my own conversation had interested the father in my behalf, and I was a fool in having exposed my person to the horror of his children, or to familiarize the elder Lacey to me, and by degrees to have discovered myself to the rest of his family, when they should have been prepared for my approach. But I did not believe my error to be irretrievable, and after much consideration I resolved to return to the cottage, seek the old man, and by my representation win him to my party. These thoughts calmed me, and in the afternoon I sank into a profound sleep, but the fever of my blood did not allow me to be visited by peaceful dreams. The horrible scene of the preceding day was forever acting before my eyes. The females were flying, and the enraged Felix tearing me from his father's feet. I woke exhausted, and finding that it was already night, I crept forth from my hiding place, and went in search of food. When my hunger was appeased, I directed my steps towards the well-known path that conducted to the cottage. All there was at peace. I crept into my hovel, and remained in silent expectation of the accustomed hour when the family arose. That hour passed, the sun mounted high in the heavens, but the cottagers did not appear. I trembled violently, and apprehending some dreadful misfortune, the inside of the cottage was dark, and I heard no motion. I cannot describe the agony of this suspense. Presently 2 countrymen passed by, but pausing near the cottage they entered into conversation, using violent gesticulations, but I did not understand what they said, as they spoke the language of the country, which differed from that of my protectors. Soon after, however, Felix approached with another man. I was surprised, as I knew that he had not quitted the cottage that morning. and waited anxiously to discover from his discourse the meaning of these unusual appearances. "Do you consider," said his companion to him, "that you will be obliged to pay 3 months' rent and to lose the produce of your garden? I do not wish to take any unfair advantage, and I beg therefore that you will take some days to consider of your determination." "It is utterly useless," replied Felix. "We can never again inhabit your cottage. The life of my father is in the greatest danger, owing to the dreadful circumstance that I have related. My wife and my sister will never recover their horror. I entreat you not to reason with me any more. Take possession of your tenement, and let me fly from this place." Felix trembled violently as he said this. He and his companion entered the cottage, in which they remained for a few minutes, and then departed. I never saw any of the family of de Lacy more. I continued for the remainder of the day in my hovel in a state of utter and stupid despair. My protectors had departed, and had broken the only link that held me to the world. For the first time the feeling of revenge and hatred filled my bosom, and I did not strive to control them, but allowing myself to be borne away by the stream, I bent my mind towards injury and death. When I thought of my friend, of the mild voice of de Lacy, the gentle eyes of Agatha, and the exquisite beauty of the Arabian, these thoughts vanished, and a gush of tears somewhat soothed me. But again, when I reflected that they had spurned and deserted me, anger returned, a rage of anger, and unable to injure anything human, I turned my fury towards inanimate objects. As night advanced, I placed a variety of combustibles around the cottage, and after having destroyed every vestige of cultivation in the garden, I waited with forced impatience until the moon had sunk to commence my operations. As the night advanced, a fierce wind... Yes, since the moon had sunk. So it's darkest, I suppose. As the night advanced, a fierce wind arose from the woods, and quickly dispersed the clouds that had loitered in the heavens. The blast tore along like a mighty avalanche, and produced a kind of insanity in my spirits that burst all bounds of reason and reflection. I lighted the dry branch of a tree, and danced with fury around the devoted cottage, my eyes still fixed on the western horizon, the edge of which the moon nearly touched. A part of its orb was at length hid, and I waved my brand. It sunk, and, with a loud scream, I fired the straw and heath and bushes which I had collected. The wind fanned the fire, and the cottage was quickly enveloped by the flames which clung to it, and licked it with their forked and destroying tongues. As soon as I was convinced that no assistance could save any part of the habitation, I quitted the scene, and sought for refuge in the woods. And now, with the world before me, whither should I bend my steps? I resolved to fly far from the scene of my misfortunes, but to me, hated and despised, every country must be equally horrible. At length the thought of you crossed my mind. I learned from your papers that you were my father, my creator, and to whom could I apply with more fitness than to him who had given me life? Among the lessons that Felix had bestowed upon Safie, geography had not been omitted. I had learned from these the relative situations of the different countries of the earth. You had mentioned Geneva as the name of your native town, and towards this place I resolved to proceed. But how was I to direct myself? I knew that I must travel in a southwesterly direction to reach my destination, but the sun was my only guide. I did not know the names of the towns that I was to pass through, nor could I ask information from a single human being. But I did not despair. From you only could I hope for succour. Although towards you I felt no sentiment but that of hatred, unfeeling, heartless creator, you'd endowed me with perceptions and passions, and then cast me abroad an object for the scorn and horror of mankind. But on you only had I any claim for pity and redress, and from you I determined to seek that justice which I vainly attempted to gain from any other being that wore the human form. My travels were long, and the sufferings I endured intense. It was late in autumn when I quitted the district where I had so long resided. I travelled only at night, fearful of encountering the visage of a human being. Nature decayed around me, and the sun became heatless. Rain and snow poured around me, mighty rivers were frozen, the surface of the earth was hard and chill and bare, and I found no shelter. O earth, how often did I imprecate curses on the cause of my being? The mildness of my nature had fled, and all within me was turned to gall and bitterness. The nearer I approached your habitation, the more deeply did I feel the spirit of revenge enkindled in my heart. Snow fell, and the waters were hardened, but I rested not. A few incidents now and then directed me, and I possessed a map of the country, but I often wandered wide from my path. The agony of my feelings allowed me no respite. No incident occurred from which my rage and misery could not extract its food, but a circumstance that happened when I arrived on the confines of Switzerland, when the sun had recovered its warmth, and the earth again began to look green, confirmed in an especial manner the bitterness and horror of my feelings. I generally rested during the day, and travelled only when I was secured by night from the view of man. One morning, however, finding that my path lay through a deep wood, I ventured to continue my journey after the sun had risen. The day, which was one of the first of spring, cheered even me by the loveliness of its sunshine and the balminess of the air. I'm trying to remember, balmy. Soothing or fragrant, or weather mild and pleasant. Oh, prudish, that was the word I was trying to remember earlier, much earlier, when we were doing the poetry. The Georgians started, as I understand it, the Georgians started the whole prudish high culture, and the Victorians inherited it and enhanced it. Anyway, where were we? I felt emotions of gentleness and pleasure that had long appeared dead revive within me. Half surprised by the novelty of these sensations, I allowed myself to be borne away by them, and forgetting my solitude and deformity, dared to be happy. Soft tears again bedewed my cheeks, and I even raised my humid eyes with thankfulness towards the blessed sun which bestowed such joy upon me. I continued to wind among the paths of the wood until I came to its boundary, which was skirted by a deep and rapid river, into which many of the trees bent their branches, now budding with the fresh spring. Here I paused, not exactly knowing what path to pursue, when I heard the sound of voices that induced me to conceal myself upon the shade of a cypress. I was scarcely hid when a young girl came running towards the spot where I was concealed, laughing as if she ran from someone in sport. She continued her course along the precipitous sides of the river, when suddenly her foot slipped, and she fell into the rapid stream. I rushed from my hiding place, and with extreme labour from the force of the current, saved her, dragged her to the shore. She was senseless, and I endeavoured by every means in my power to restore animation, when I was suddenly interrupted by the approach of a rustic. It was probably the person from which she had playfully fled. On seeing me, he darted towards me, and tearing the girl from my arms, hastened towards the deeper parts of the woods. I followed speedily. I hardly knew why, but when the man saw me draw near, he aimed a gun, which he carried, at my body and fired. I sank to the ground, and my injurer, with increased swiftness, escaped into the wood. This was then the reward of my benevolence. I had saved a human being from destruction, and, as recompense, I now writhed under the miserable pain of a wound which shattered the flesh and bone. The feeling of kindness and gentleness which I had entertained but a few moments before gave place to hellish rage and gnashing of teeth. Inflamed by pain, I vowed eternal hatred and vengeance to all mankind, but the agony of my wound overcame me. My pulses paused, and I fainted. For some weeks I led a miserable life in the woods, endeavouring to cure the wound which I had received. The ball had entered my shoulder, and I knew not whether it had remained there or passed through. At any rate, I had no means of extracting it. My sufferings were augmented also by the oppressive sense of the injustice and ingratitude of their infliction. My daily vows rose for revenge, a deep and deadly revenge, such as would alone compensate for the outrages and anguish I had endured. After some weeks my wound healed, and I continued my journey. The labours I endured were no longer to be alleviated by the bright sun or gentle breezes of spring. All joy was but a mockery, which insulted my desolate state and made me feel more painfully that I was not made for the enjoyment of pleasure. But my toils now drew near a close, and in 2 months from this time I reached the environs of Geneva. It was evening when I arrived, and I retired to a hiding place among the fields surround it, to meditate in what manner I should apply to you. I was oppressed by fatigue and hunger, and far too unhappy to enjoy the gentle breezes of evening, or the prospect of the sun setting behind this stupendous mountain of Jura. At this time a slight sleep relieved me from the pain of reflection, which was disturbed by the approach of a beautiful child, who came running into the recess I had chosen, with all the sportiveness of infancy. Suddenly, as I gazed on him, an idea seized me, that this little creature was unprejudiced, and had lived too short a time to have imbibed a horror of deformity. If, therefore, I could seize him, and educate him as my companion and friend, I should not be so desolate in this peopled earth. Urged by this impulse, I seized on the boy as he passed, and drew him towards me. As soon as he beheld my form, he placed his hands before his eyes, and uttered a shrill scream. I drew his hand forcibly from his face, and said, "Child, what is the meaning of this? I do not intend to hurt you. Listen to me." He struggled violently. "Let me go," he cried. "Monster! Ugly wretch! You wish to eat me and tear me to pieces. You're an ogre. Let me go, or I will tell my papa. But you will never see your father again. You must come with me. Hideous monster, let me go. My papa is a syndic. He is Monsieur Frankenstein. He will punish you. You dare not keep me. Frankenstein, you belong then to my enemy, to him towards whom I have sworn eternal revenge. You shall be my first victim." The child still struggled, and loaded with epithets which carried despair to my heart. I grasped his throat to silence him, and in a moment he lay dead at my feet. I gazed on my victim, and my heart swelled with exultation and hellish triumph. Clapping my hands, I exclaimed, "I too can create dissolution. My enemy is not invulnerable. This death will carry despair to him, and 1,000 other miseries shall torment and destroy him." As I fixed my eyes on the child, I saw something glittering on his breast. I took it. It was a portrait of a most lovely woman. In spite of my malignity, it softened and attracted me. For a few moments I gazed with delight on her dark eyes, fringed by deep lashes, and her lovely lips, but presently my rage returned. I remembered that I was forever deprived of the delights that such beautiful creatures could bestow, and that she whose resemblance I contemplated would, in regarding me, have changed that air of divine benignity to one expressive of disgust and affright. Can you wonder that such thoughts transported me with rage? I only wonder that at that moment, instead of venting my sensations in exclamations and agony, I did not rush among mankind and perish in the attempt to destroy them. While I was overcome by these feelings, I left the spot where I had committed the murder, and seeking a more secluded hiding place, I entered a barn which had appeared to me to be empty. A woman was sleeping on some straw. She was young, not indeed so beautiful as her whose portrait I held, but of an agreeable aspect, and blooming in the loveliness of youth and health. Here, I thought, is one of those whose joy-imparting smiles had bestowed on all but me, and I bent over her and whispered, "Awake, fairest, thy lover is near. He would give his life but to obtain one look of affection from thine eyes. My beloved, awake." The sleeper stirred. A thrill of terror ran through me. Should she indeed awake and see me, and curse me, and denounce the murderer? Thus would she assuredly act, if her darkened eyes opened, and she beheld me. The thought was madness. It stirred the fiend within me. Not I, but she shall suffer. The murder I have committed because I am forever robbed of all that she could give me. She shall atone. The crime had its source in her. Be hers the punishment. Thanks to the lessons of Felix and the sanguinary laws of man, I had learned now to work mischief. I bent over her and placed the portrait securely in one of the folds of her dress. She moved again, and I fled. For some days I haunted the spot where these scenes had taken place, sometimes wishing to see you, sometimes resolved to quit the world and its miseries forever. At length I wandered towards these mountains, and have ranged through their immense recesses, consumed by a burning passion which you alone can gratify. We may not part until you have promised to comply with my requisition. I am alone and miserable. Man will not associate with me, but one as deformed and horrible as myself would not deny herself to me. My companion must be one of the same species and have the same defects. This being you must create. Chapter 17. The being finished speaking and fixed his looks upon me in expectation of a reply, but I was bewildered, perplexed, and unable to arrange my ideas sufficiently to understand the full extent of his proposition. He continued, "You must create a female for me, with whom I can live in the interchange of those sympathies necessary for my being. This you alone can do, and I demand it of you as a right which you must not refuse to concede." The latter part of his tale had kindled anew in me the anger that had died away while he narrated his peaceful life among the cottagers, and as he said this I could no longer suppress the rage that burned within me. "I do refuse," I replied, "and no torture shall ever extort consent from me. You may render me the most miserable of men, but you shall never make me base in my own eyes. Should I create another like yourself, whose joint wickedness might desolate the world? Begone, I have answered you. You may torture me, but I will never consent." "You are in the wrong," replied the fiend, "and instead of threatening, I am content to reason with you. I am malicious because I am miserable. I am not shunned and hated by all. Am I not shunned and hated by all mankind? You, my creator, would tear me to pieces and triumph. Remember that, and tell me why I should pity man more than he pities me. You would not call it murder if you could precipitate me into one of those ice rifts and destroy my frame, the work of your own hands. Should I respect man when he condemns me? Let him live with me in the interchange of kindness, and instead of injury I would bestow every benefit upon him with tears of gratitude at his acceptance. But that cannot be. The human senses are insurmountable barriers to our union. Yet mine shall not be the submission of abject slavery. I will revenge my injuries. If I cannot inspire love, I will cause fear, and chiefly towards you, my arch-enemy, because my creator, do I swear inextinguishable hatred. Have a care. I will not work at your destruction, nor finish until I desolate your heart, so that you shall curse the hour of your birth." A fiendish rage animated him as he said this. His eye was wrinkled into contortions too horrible for human eyes to behold, but presently he calmed himself and proceeded. "I intended to reason. This passion is detrimental to me, for you do not reflect that you are the cause of its excess. If any being felt emotions of benevolence towards me, I should return them 100 fold. For that one creature's sake I would make peace with the whole kind. But I now indulge in dreams of bliss that cannot be realized. What I ask of you is reasonable and moderate. I demand a creature of another sex, but as hideous as myself. The gratification is small, but it is all that I can receive, and it shall content me. It is true, we shall be monsters, cut off from all the world, but on that account we shall be more attached to one another. Our lives will not be happy, but they will be harmless and free from the misery I now feel. Oh, my Creator, make me happy. Let me feel gratitude towards you for one benefit. Let me see that I excite the sympathy of some existing thing. Do not deny me my request." I was moved. I shuddered when I thought of the possible consequences of my consent, but I felt that there was some justice in his argument. His tale and the feelings he now expressed proved him to be a creature of fine sensations, and did I not, as his maker, owe him all the portion of happiness that it was in my power to bestow? He saw my change of feeling and continued. "If you consent, neither you nor any other human being shall ever see us again, or go to the vast wilds of South America. My food is not that of man. I do not destroy the lamb and the kid to glut my appetite. Acorns and berries afford me sufficient nourishment. A companion will be of the same nature as myself, and will be content with the same fare. We shall make our bed of dried leaves, the sun will shine on us as on man, and we will ripen our food. The picture I present to you is peaceful and human, and you must feel that you could deny it only in the and you must feel that you could deny it only in the wantonness of power and cruelty. Pitiless as you have been towards me, I now see compassion in your eyes. Let me seize the favourable moment and persuade you to promise what I so ardently desire." You propose," replied I, "to fly from the habitations of man, to dwell in those wilds where beasts of the field will be your only companions. How can you, who long for the love and sympathy of man, persevere in this exile? You will return and again seek their kindness, and you will meet with their detestation. Your evil passions will be renewed, and you will then have a companion to aid you in the task of destruction. This may not be. Cease to argue the point, for I cannot consent. How inconstant are your feelings! But a moment ago you were moved by my representations. Why do you again harden yourself to my complaints? I swear to you, by the earth which I inhabit, and by you that made me, that with the companion you bestow, I will quit the neighbourhood of man and dwell, as it may chance, in the most savage of places. My evil passions will have fled, for I shall meet with sympathy. My life will flow quietly away, and in my dying moments I shall not curse my Maker." His words had a strange effect upon me. I compassionated him, and sometimes felt a wish to console him. When I looked upon him, when I saw the filthy mess that moved and talked, my heart sickened, and my feelings were altered to those of horror and hatred. I tried to stifle these sensations. I thought that as I could not sympathize with him, I had no right to withhold from him the small portion of happiness which was yet in my power to bestow. You swear, I said, to be harmless, but have you not already shown a degree of malice that should reasonably make me distrust you? May not even this be a feint that will increase your triumph by affording a wider scope for your revenge? How is this? I must not be trifled with, and I demand an answer. If I have no ties and no affections, hatred and vice must be my portion. The love of another will destroy the cause of my crimes, and I shall become a thing of whose existence everyone will be ignorant. My vices are the children of forced solitude that I abhor, and my virtues will necessarily arise when I live in communion with an equal. I shall feel the affections of a sensitive being, and become linked to the chain of existence and events from which I am now excluded. I paused some time to reflect on all he had related, and the various arguments he had employed. I thought the promise of virtues which he displayed on the opening of his existence, and the subsequent blight of all kindly feelings by the loathing and scorn which his protectors had manifested towards him. His powers and threats were not omitted in my calculations. A creature who could exist in the ice caves of the glaciers and hide himself from pursuit among the ridges of inaccessible precipices was a being possessing faculties it would be vain to cope with. After a long pause of reflection, I concluded that justice due both to him and my fellow creatures demanded of me that I should comply with his request. Turning to him, therefore, I said, I consent to your demand, and on your solemn oath to quit Europe forever, and every other place in the neighbourhood of man, as soon as I shall deliver into your hands a female who will accompany you in your exile. I swear, he cried, by the sun and by the blue sky of heaven, and by the fire of love that burns my heart, that if you grant my prayer, while they exist you shall never behold me again. Depart to your home and commence your labours. I shall watch their progress with unutterable anxiety, and fear not but that when you are ready I shall appear. Saying this, he suddenly quitted me. Fearful perhaps of any change in my sentiments, I saw him descend the mountain with greater speed than the flight of an eagle, and quickly lost among the undulations of the sea of ice. His tail had accompanied me the whole day, and the sun was upon the verge of the horizon when he departed. I knew that I ought to hasten my descent towards the valley, as I should soon be encompassed in darkness, but my heart was heavy, and my steps slow. The labour of winding among the little paths of the mountains and fixing my feet firmly as I advanced perplexed me, accompanied as I was by the emotions which the occurrence of the day had produced. Night was far advanced when I came to the halfway resting place and seated myself beside the fountain. The stars shone at intervals as the clouds passed from over them. The dark pines rose before me, and every here and there a broken tree lay on the ground. It was a scene of wonderful solemnity, and stirred strange thoughts within me. I wept bitterly, and clasping my hands in agony, I exclaimed, "Oh, stars and clouds and winds, ye are all about to mock me. If ye really pity me, crush sensations and memory, let me become as naught, but if not, depart and leave me in darkness." These were wild and miserable thoughts, but I cannot describe to you how the eternal twinkling of the stars weighed upon me, and how I listened to every blast of wind, as if it were a dull, ugly siroc on its way to consume me. Siroc. Synonym of Sirocco. A hot and often strong southerly to southeasterly wind on the Mediterranean that originates in the Sahara and adjacent North African regions. Draft of hot air from an artificial source of heat. I now listen to every blast of wind as if it were a dull, ugly siroc on its way to consume me. I'm still not sure I fully follow that. Let's check my physical dictionary. a Sirocco Saharan wind or simoon when it reaches Italy. Also for warm, sultry, rainy wind prevailing in winter. Interesting. Still not sure what it means by consume, but still. Or how a syrup could be dull and ugly. Anyway, morning dawned before I arrived at the village of Chamonix, which I'm sure I'm mispronouncing. I took no rest, but returned immediately to Geneva. Even in my own heart, I could give no expression to my sensations. They weighed on me with a mountain's weight, and their excess destroyed my agony beneath them. Thus I returned home, and entering the house, presented myself to the family. My haggard and wild appearance awoke intense alarm, but I answered no questions. Scarcely did I speak. I felt as if I were placed under a ban, as if I had no right to claim their sympathies, as if never more might I enjoy companionship with them. Yet even thus I loved them to adoration, and to save them I resolved to dedicate myself to my most abhorred task. The prospect of such an occupation made every other circumstance of existence pass before me like a dream, and that thought only had to me the reality of life. I think we will probably move on to the riddles now. Yes. So I think the last one we finished off on was 111. That is the last one we looked at last week. As their worth to proclaim every mortal is prone, 'tis but natural the wish to make my merits known. When they are all related, few folks will pretend their value superior with me to contend. The world being pleased to place virtue in birth, but that I shall first plead pretensions to worth. That 'tis ancient by records most sacred is shown, if consulted they prove ere Adam was known. They employed by the sovereign dispenser of good, I assigned the first couple their dwelling and food. My pedigree proved, I shall next make my claim to properties better entitled to fame. Wisdom, learning, and wit, virtue, piety, grace, all excellence known to mankind you may trace in my numerous characters published by those who in showing my value their own worth disclose. Strong judgment with genius assemblage so praised, for its scarceness I boast, to this fame I was raised by the verdict of Melmoth, of Cowper and Knox, and for this also own myself debtor to Fox. To prove I am grateful, their names I'll enroll on the place most conspicuous of fame's sacred scroll. Rousseau says in use the best merit is founded. My value, if so I can prove, is well grounded. For 'tis granted the greatest advantage man knows, my power universal as precious bestows. It communicates all that existence endears, speeds sweet sympathies, efforts to dry sorrow's tears, gives wealth, fame, and honours, and oft has been found o'er life to preside. Then 'twill surely be owned that my use, value, power, all which I've claimed to praise, above their true standard no plaudits can raise. But though much is here said, my vast worth to unfold, you may credit me half of my merits untold. Yet if all my value I have not revealed, I must own that my errors are also concealed. What a wretch would you deem, if once they were told, when you found I could swear, lie, rave, quarrel, and scold. That the vilest employments I never reject, but a vice's commands on fair virtue reflect. From the bosom of innocence cruelly tear the blossom of peace and plant thorns of despair. that I must bring almost every disaster on man, and oppose with malignity wisdom's best plan. Yet I hope when 'tis known that in this I'm abused, and compelled thus to act, I shall then be excused. For 'tis certain my natures never leads me to ill, when 'tis in yielding to other folks' will. Like poor seamen, I into the service am pressed, and commanded to fight, though I'm minded to rest. Now candidly balance my virtues and errors, and though what is thought of me oft causes terrors, in my favour I think you will pass a decree, and that merit's predominant all will agree. In fact, I am not much afraid you should scout me, though sometimes perversely determined to flout me, because 'tis well known you cannot do without me. I don't remember with certainty what the answer to that one was, but I think it might be language. Let's see. It is language. So all that talk of the fact that it's ancient, it's responsible for some of the greatest and most noble things associated with the human condition, but also the worst, although it's forced to act in evil ways. Language. So the first riddle we've not looked at today, not looked at before, is 112. So let's get into it. As to power, 'tis the rage that all folks bend the knee. 'Tis much wonder more homage is not paid to me. For though much I possess, O caprice of mankind, I often laugh to create, but respect never find. To prove these pretensions to power well founded, I now shall inform you on what they are grounded. Will then certainly grant no man in the nation can boast half so much, whatever his station. Unless you should think that power superhuman, I specify first I was born of a woman. I laughed, cried, and eat pap, as most other brats do. What's pap? Food in the form of soft paste, often a porridge, especially is given to very young children. Pap can be made from bread boiled in milk or water. Interesting. I laugh, cried, and eat pap as most other brats do, and from childhood to manhood as other folks grew. Now, though strange, it is true that throughout my whole race, no female was ever yet known to her place, and we're generally silent. The wits may suppose that's the cause whence this strange and as we're generally silent, the wits may suppose that's the cause whence this strange taciturnity flows. But that as it may, though our tongues rarely move, in motion our limbs no deficiency prove. Of words we're small need, since a wish will produce whatever we want or require for our use. If town for the country we'd willingly change, midst groves, woods, and lawns in a minute we range, and thousands have witnessed this truth I unfold, that seasons have even by my will been controlled. While summer was showing the charms of her face, at my mandate she yielded to winter her place. Not only to this point my influence extended, the gay spring of youth at that moment was ended. Sweet damsels who danced with her swains on the green. Swains? Oh, as in a nefarious individual. A young man or boy in service, a servant. Okay, that's very different to what I thought. A knight servant, an attendant, a country labourer, a countryman, a rustic, a rural lover, a male sweetheart in pastoral setting. Oh wow, I really did not know that's what that term meant. So it would be the final usage then. A rural lover, a male sweetheart in a pastoral setting. It's sweet damsels who danced with her swains on the green, as old as their grandnams, were presently seen. And what stranger than ever this power over youth, against his nature a liar, I've made speak the truth. But if through the whole course of my wonders I run, you'll be apt to exclaim, will he never have done? In a few further lines, then my hints I'll compress. Who I am they will probably lead you to guess. I've declared that no female among us is found, yet in their soft fetters we ever are bound. To their empire we yield, and liege subjects we prove, for we always are faithful and always in love. As to London in winter great folks will repair, in that season you'll certainly meet with me there. To the country I scarcely my course ever steer, because there in full glory I do not appear. As enough of particulars now I've disclosed, with one general hint I'll conclude as proposed. My dominion, its proof these memoirs will afford, like Prussia's great monarchs, is gained by the sword. Well, this is a very interesting one, isn't it? If anyone in chat has any ideas, suggestions, thoughts, etc., please leave a comment and we'll discuss. I think this is too far zoomed out, isn't it? That's going to be very, very difficult to read. Okay. Against his nature a liar, I've made speak the truth. I'm struggling with this one. It's such an interesting one, though. As to power, 'tis the rage, that all folks bend the knee. 'Tis much wonder more homage is not paid to me. So it's not to power. For though much I possessed, O caprice of mankind, I oft laugh to create, but respect never find. That's an interesting one, that's really interesting. To prove these pretensions to power well founded, I shall now inform you on what they are grounded. You'll then certainly grant no man in the nation can boast half so much, whatever his station, unless you should think that power superhuman. I specify first I was born of a woman. Misery, as in Pandora? Pandora and the box containing all the world's evils? I laugh, cried, and eat pap as most of our brats do, and from childhood to manhood as other folks grew. Well, it doesn't really figure with that, does it? Now though strange it is, true, that throughout my whole race no female was ever yet known to have place, and we're generally silent, the wits may suppose that's the cause whence this strange taciturnity flows. But that as it may, though our tongues rarely move, in motion our limbs no deficiency prove. See, this is sounding much more physical. But then it produces laughter, which seems odd. Of words with small need, since a wish will produce whatever we want or require for our use. If town for the country would willingly change, midst groves, woods, and lawns in a minute we range, and thousands of witnesses truth I unfold, that seasons have even by my will been controlled. While summer was showing the charms of her face, at my mandate she yielded to winter her place. That doesn't sound like the world's evils. Not only to this point my influence extended, the gay spring of youth at that moment was ended. Sweet damsels who danced with her swains on the green, as old as their grandnams, were presently seen. And what stranger than even this power over youth, gainst his nature a liar I've made speak the truth. But if through the whole course of my wonders I run, you'll be apt to exclaim, will he never have done? And a few further lines than my hints I'll compress. Who I am they will probably lead you to guess. I've declared that no female among us is found, yet in their fetters we ever are bound. To their empire we yield, and liege subjects we prove. What do you mean by liege subjects? To free a free and independent person, a lord paramount, a sovereign, a king or lord, the subject of a sovereign or lord, a liegeman. Sovereign, independent, having authority or right to allegiance, serving an independent sovereign or master, full, perfect, complete, pure. And liege subjects we prove. To the empires we yield, and liege subjects we prove. Oh, I see, so that's just emphasizing the fact they're subjects. Serving an independent sovereign or master, bound by feudal tenure, obliged to be faithful and loyal to a superior, such as a vassal to his lord, faithful. For we always are faithful and always in love, as to London in winter great folks will repair, and that season you'll certainly meet with me there. To the country I scarcely my course ever steer, because there in full glory I do not appear. As enough of particulars now I've disclosed, with one general hint I'll conclude as proposed. My dominion, its proof, these memoirs will afford, like Prussia's great monarchs, it's gained by the sword. The only thing I can think, and it doesn't fully figure, is reputation. One's reputation. But it doesn't fully figure. Let's find out then. Harlequin. A A harlequin is a jester, aren't they? Originally, they were in some way and to some extent immune to persecution by the sovereign because they spoke in jest, and then this was used as a mechanism to have them as an individual that could point things out to a monarch that no one else could, as I understand it. A pretentious fool, typically dressed in colourful checkered clothes. That's the only explanation they have here. Let's see what my physical dictionary has to say. Character harlequin, a character in Italian comedy. New character in English pantomime, invisible to clown and pantaloon, usually wearing party-coloured tights. Buffoon. Interesting. It sounds like this is one of those concepts that have been lost. I mean, I'm sure some people would know what a harlequin is, but it sounds like that's something that they assumed every reader would know, but which by now, probably just over 200 years later, we've largely forgotten. Well, that's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. So, 103. I'm double, I'm single, I'm good, and I'm bad. As my followers abundantly prove, by a trick it is known I am oft to be had, but am gained with more pleasure by love. What strange may appear, I can give to the face, at one moment both smiles and chagrin. And though oft to mankind I bring shame and disgrace, without honour I never am seen. Interesting. And though oft to mankind I bring shame and disgrace, without honour I never am seen. So it's important to note where the semicolons are. So, I'm double, I'm single, I'm good and I'm bad, as my followers abundantly prove. That's one statement. By a trick it is known I am oft to be had, but am gained with more pleasure by love. That's another. What strange may appear I can give to the face at one moment both smiles and chagrin. That's another statement. And though oft to mankind I bring shame and disgrace, without honour I never am seen. And that's the final statement. Most of it would figure with mockery. I don't know about the I'm double, I'm single, but the I'm good and I'm bad, as my followers abundantly prove, that would figure with mockery. But a trick it is known, I am oft to be had, but am gained with more pleasure by love. Mockery again, that would make sense. What's the expression? Oh, what's the expression? I keep thinking it's something like imitation is imitation is the sincerest form of flattery or something like that, but I'm not sure that is the expression. Oh, it is. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. That is the expression. So perhaps better than phrasing it as mockery, imitation. I'm double, I'm single, I'm good and I'm bad, and as my followers abundantly prove, by a trick it is known I am oft to be had, but am gained with more pleasure by love. What strange may appear I can give to the face at one moment both smiles and chagrin. That makes sense. If someone's imitating you, you might take it personally, hence chagrin, or it might bring smiles to people's faces, and though oft to mankind I bring shame and disgrace, without honour I never am seen. It's the last sentence, or even the last clause, which I think gives me the most trouble. That doesn't quite fit with imitation, does it? Unless... No, that I can't think of a way to justify that, but otherwise it would make some sense. So let's see what the answer is. A game of whist. I wouldn't have guessed that. As you know, because I didn't. I'm double, I'm single. I'm good and I'm bad. As my followers abundantly prove, by a trick it is known I am oft to be had, but am gained with more pleasure by love. I don't follow. What strange may appear I can give to the face at one moment both smiles and chagrin, and though oft to mankind I bring shame and disgrace, without honour I never am seen. I mean, that kinda makes sense. You could say that about any card game. Yeah, I don't fully follow that. Still. And we'll finish on 114, addressed to a lady. What beauties with grace may do, what when you're dressed looks well on you, what every social man would be to please the present company, what master of her wife would give, on what a parson's horse may live, what misses us for similes, when fingers smart or headaches tease, what antiquarians gladly live to make the former ages live, what some men never think too bold, to load their chests with ill-got gold, what I with pleasure would pursue, if you, my fair one, would prove true. Again, make careful note of where the semicolons are. So what every social man would be to please the present company is a statement. What misses use for similes when fingers smart or headaches tease is another. What antiquarians gladly give to make the former ages live is another. What some men think too bold to load their chest with ill-got gold is another. What I with pleasure would pursue if you my fair one would prove true is another. What beauties with grace may do, what when your dress looks well on you, what every social man would be to please the present company, what master for a wife would give, on what a parson's horse may live, what misses use for similes, when fingers smart or headaches tease, what antiquarians gladly antiquarians gladly give to make the former ages live. Let's double check. What's an antiquarians precisely? Yeah, pertaining to antiquity, obviously. A collector or student of or expert in antiquities or antiques. Yes. So fairly broad. But some men never think too bold to load their chests with ill-got gold. What I with pleasure would pursue if you my fair one would prove true. What master for a wife would give. I really don't know. My best guess is a flower or flowers. What beauties with a grace may do. Flower, in the sense of to bloom. What when you're dressed looks well on you. A flower. What every social man would be to please the present company. What does that make sense with flower? Because I understand it has a sense, a social sense as well. What would that be? The best examples are representative of a group. Yes. The best state of things are prime. So yeah, that would figure. On what a parson's horse may live, flowers, I assume. I mean, I don't see why you couldn't live off flowers. A horse couldn't, rather. A person couldn't. What Mrs. use for similes, when finger smart or headaches tease. I didn't understand that one. I should probably check. Does simile have some meaning other than the obvious? No. It's a figure of speech. In which one thing is explicitly compared to another. What Mrs. use for similes? One finger smart or headaches tease. Don't get that one. What antiquarians gladly live to make the former ages live. Doesn't really make sense. This would make sense if there was some fashion for reenacting times gone past and they used a lot of flowers in their recreations at the time when this was written, but that is a bit of a stretch. What some men never think too bold to load their chest with ill-got gold. Again, doesn't really make sense, but I don't follow that one anyway. Some men think too bold to load their chest with ill-got gold. What I with pleasure would pursue if you, my fair one, would prove true. Flowers, as in the growing thereof. Doesn't fully figure. It's the best I've got. Anything. I did consider everything and then I dismissed it. What beauties with a grace may do. Anything. That doesn't figure because there are all sorts of horrid things that wouldn't be associated with a graceful beauty. What when you're dressed looks well on you. See, that's just complimentary, but again, is objectively not true. What every social man would be to please the present company, that makes sense. What a master for a wife would give, that makes sense. And what a parson's horse may live, again, half makes sense. I get what they're getting at. Part of the reason why I considered everything, but I rejected it for other reasons. What Mrs. used for similes, when fingers smart or headaches tease. Okay, that's slightly funny. What antiquarians glad live to make the former ages live, that makes sense. What some men think too bold to load their chest with ill-got gold, that makes sense. What I with pleasure would pursue if you, my love, would prove true. See, I was thinking everything, but anything kind of makes sense there. Makes more sense than everything. Okay. Well, that's it for this week anyway. I hope you enjoyed the stream. I'll be streaming again on Friday, in which we should be starting Mist 5. All things going well. Saturday's also going to be a video game stream, and so is next Monday. Then we get round to poetry, prose and riddles next Wednesday. So, once again, thank you for coming everyone, and I hope you all have a wonderful night. Good night.